I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. Happy New Year. It's January. It's time to, I don't know what, hibernate longer because January kind of sucks. I'm just kidding. Anyway, I'm so excited that you're here today. Thank you for joining me. I have Kitty Wilkin, also known as Night Quilter on Instagram, if you know. She is incredible. She does such amazing work. And if you were at QuiltCon 2024, then you probably saw her runner quilt. It hung in the show. And it was just a visual representation of the miles that she ran the in the previous year, and it's just so cool. Anyway, she has some classes. Her most recent class is the watercolor to quilt on demand. She taught it at QuiltCon 2024, so some of you have already been exposed to it, but it's now an on-demand class where you can learn how to make small watercolor paintings, and they don't have to be like masterpieces, right? But just using shape and color and then translating that into a mini quilt. So that's amazing. She's got quilt photography tutorials or on-demand class. She's got an on-demand class about making tiny ornaments. And she has the Quilt Your Life crew membership, which sounds incredible. She talks all about it in the episode, so you can kind of get a feel for if that's something that you would want to do. She incredibly opened up enrollment, so it is open all year long. There's no window of time where you have to enroll, and there's a sliding scale for pay. So she's really made it accessible to people to join and be a part of the Quilt Your Life crew. So check that out. I'm just excited for you guys to hear this conversation. She's just got some really good nuggets of wisdom, and um, yeah, I hope it's encouraging for the start of your new year. Welcome to 2025, and let's get into it. Hi, Kitty. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. I'm so excited that you're here today.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, this is great. I've been aware of you for a little while and like recently started following your work. I think because Instagram suggests people to me a lot, I like see people's accounts and I see people's work, but then I realize I'm not even following them somehow. And I'm like, what the heck? So if I'm a recent follower, it's because of that reason. Like I've been seeing your stuff, I just wasn't following for some reason. So anyway, I'm very excited to talk to you today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I honestly think Instagram like unfollows people for you because that's happened to me too, where I've been suggested to follow someone and I checked and I'm like, how am I not following them yet? So no worries. It's all good.
Yeah, it's a wild place, but here we
Yeah.
are. It
Mhm.
kept us connected, so that was good. But I I'm so excited to talk to you. But first, I want to talk about how you got into quilting and sewing in the first place.
Okay, so I've always been a creative person, drawing, making, that kind of thing, but didn't have any quilters in my family. And then I married into a family with a quilter. And Grammy June was a very talented hand, like traditional quilter. So most of her quilts were made pieced by hand, quilted by hand, hung in museums. She was very modest, so she wouldn't acknowledge any of her masterpiece. But so I married into this family and got a quilt for a wedding gift.
Mm.
It was a queen sized, hand pieced mandala type stunning quilt. And I admired it as a maker, but at no point was I like, that's something I could or want to do. I was like, wait, that's intricate. That is wow, that is meticulous. Which is funny when you know where my trajectory in quilting went like straight to that kind of stuff, but I digress. So, and then my cousin gave us a very simple squares baby quilt for my oldest child when she was born. This was like 15 years ago. And she used modern fabrics and modern colors, and it was just squares. And so receipt like that kind of brought it full circle. Like Grammy June was a quilter, and so that brought me into the world of quilting as a thing. I didn't know what it was. And then the gift from Hannah made me realize that it could be done more in a more modern way and a more like I don't know, it's more my aesthetic way.
Mhm.
And so that's where I started. I was like, oh, I could do this. And I made a picnic quilt of squares that we still have that is barely in pieces, but um, so then I started quilting because like my children were very young. My oldest was probably 2, and I had just had my second child, and it was a way for me to have a creative outlet and make something that felt functional.
Mhm.
And I found the online quilting world, mostly quilt blogs, because my partner is a programmer and always had a blog, and I would always laugh about it. And then I ended up starting a blog and finding all this community through the modern quilt blog community. And so a lot of what I learned, like how I learned to quilt, people ask, how'd you learn?
Mhm.
Mostly from reading blog tutorials way back in the day, or just trying things. And it just kind of took off from there. Like I started a blog to share my work because I live in rural Maine and I didn't know any quilters aside from Grammy June.
Mhm.
It's a very different demographic than the quilting that I wanted to do. And yeah, it was just a great way to meet other makers. And as a fairly isolated mom in rural Maine of young kids, it was a way to connect with people about my work and talk excitedly about it. And it kind of took off from there.
Yeah. That's so cool, and just that kind of self-taught nature is, I think, where a lot of people start. They just wanna figure it out, so they do, and I mean and I think seeing, like, yeah, people's intricate work and, like, the intricate handwork that was done, like, by older quilters, you're like, "I could never do that," but then, yeah, that introduction of patchwork and just squares, you're like, "Wait, I could do that," you know?
Mhm,
That
exactly.
that
Bring it
kind of
down to a
mindset.
level that's more accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that mindset switch of like, "Oh, wait, it's just sewing squares together, I can do that," and then that's the gateway drug, right? Like
Totally, totally. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I didn't stop.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there's a lot to be said too to that beginner mindset. And I think Grammy June helped that a lot because my maybe second quilt ever, possibly third, it might have been my third, was a double wedding ring. It was a wall hanging, but it was a double wedding ring quilt with like gold polyester fabric, gold polyester thread. And I didn't know that that was hard because I
Yeah.
didn't know anything about it. I just went to Grammy June. My sister-in-law was getting married and I wanted to make a wall hanging with their wedding colors,
Mhm.
which happened to have gold in it. So I was like, well, I need gold fabric, not knowing that that is a nightmare to work with. Um, and I was like, Grammy June, I feel like I've heard of some like wedding ring quilt. Do you think I could do that? And she's like, yeah, of course you can. And this is like literally my like second, maybe third quilt.
Yeah.
He's like, here's my pattern, here's the templates, which of course were like cereal box cardboard, right? The
Yeah.
pattern was a handwritten Xerox from 30 years prior, and this was 15 years ago. So
Wow.
like, I was using little cardboard templates and but I made it. And like sure, some of the curves were wonky, but when you don't know it's supposed to be hard, and
Mhm.
you just like you have someone like Grammy June who's like, yeah, you can do it. Just take it one step at a time, no
Yeah.
problem. It was a really great mindset to approach new things. And I think that contributed to I won't say fearlessness because, of course, there's always apprehension, but I tend to have a dive in and try it kind of mindset with things, and Grammy June certainly helped that. Because the same thing happened with foundation paper piecing. I was like, I've heard of this thing. Is it hard? And she's like, oh, you could do it. You could totally do it. Here, try it. And I just kind of dove in. Um, and then started designing my own patterns because I couldn't find the pattern. Like I wanted to make lupin. Lupin
Mhm.
is a flower that's very common up here in Maine.
Mhm.
And I could not find a lupin pattern. And I was like, well, I'll just make one.
Mm.
And that's how that whole thing started. So then I started
Yeah.
designing patterns, and it really was, I found quilting because of Grammy June, and I continued doing it because I found community that I really needed and a creative outlet that, I don't know, I love working with fabric still, 15 years later. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the love just deepens when you keep finding new ways to access it and
Hmm.
work with it and show your evolution as a human. Like my first quilts are nothing like the quilts I make now, and the majority of quilts I make are for clients, just because that's my job and I get hired out to do that. But it still allows me to make things that I never would choose to make for myself. And so I'm like so grateful that I was audacious enough to be like, I can have a quilting business after
Yeah,
only having
absolutely.
quilted for, a year and a half. But it's just given me so much. And yeah, the community is that's where it's
Mhm.
at. I mean, other quilters and people who understand how important it is to put your hands on fabric and make something new with it is there's nothing
Absolutely.
like it.
Yeah.
It's
So
so cool.
have you ever found a technique that you didn't know you loved that you love because of a client request?
Mm, mhm. I thought I was gonna hate applique. I don't do like needle turn or fancy like handwork, but just like doing applique stuff, I never really thought it was gonna be for me. But the things I've been able to create because of it, I'm like, that's a really cool quilt. So,
Awesome. Yeah, it
um,
has its place. I mean, I think that's a really neat thing. The more you deepen your technique
mhm.
toolbox, if you will, the more there are no limits as to what you can make.
Yeah,
Because there's always, especially if you open up to the idea that one quilt doesn't have to have only one technique. Like you can have
exactly.
precision piecing and traditional piecing and improv and curves and hand stitched and like
Mhm.
whatever you need to make it happen can happen on the same quilt. And that's opens up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah. How about for you? What's the technique you didn't think you'd like or that you like but you didn't know?
I like them all and they all I I like to I like to mix it up. I'm undiagnosed, self-diagnosed ADHD, but it's very
Same.
prevalent, I think, in my work because I like to have a variety of projects going. They all have their merit and they all have their place. Like hand stitching, English paper piecing, I love. I mean, I really love them all. It's really I started off doing mostly traditional piecing, fell in love with foundation paper piecing because of its precision. I
Mhm.
like meticulosity. And when I first started sewing, I had two or three very young kids, and my middle child is autistic, we now know, but it was very chaotic and hard to be a
Mhm.
full-time mom of three. Um, and so quilting was my place where I had control, and quilting
Mhm.
was the place where I could make things just so, and I could flex that muscle of matching seams and, fussy cutting a particular motif and repeating it to create a whole new pattern. And like that really resonated with me during that period of time. And I
Mhm.
also at that point felt very much that my productivity was tied, my worth was tied to my productivity. I had that
Mm.
like, I need to do something in a day to feel like I did something today, even though I now know
Yeah.
that being alive and keeping my three kids alive is enough. I've grown
Yes.
a lot, mostly through quilting since then. But at that time, English paper piecing, like hand stitching, was something that I would have it on the counter while I was cooking dinner. And so I'd be like chopping and cooking and parenting, and then I'd stitch three stitches, and then I'd
Mhm.
chop and stir and whatever. And the fact that it was there, that it could fill the space, made
Mhm.
me feel like I was accomplishing something in the day on days when I felt like I wasn't doing anything other than survive.
Yeah.
Then as life went on and I was able to let go of that need for precision or like sense of control, we don't control anything that
Right.
oh no, like we think we're in control and really like we can't control anything. We can control the way we react to things. That's about it. But once I kind of let go of that need for control, I started dabbling more in the world of improv and letting
Mm.
go of expectation and being able to cut through a block, not knowing what it's going to look like, make a bunch of blocks, not knowing what the quilt will look like at the end. And like I've seen a definite progression through different techniques in different points of life because of that. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of went on a total tangent
No, it's good.
question
It's
of what
good.
technique, but I've done them all. I like them all. For the like needle turn applique, I love because of the diversity of designs you can make and the control you have when you're stitching with a needle in your hand.
Mhm.
There's so much control over where things go and how things go. Raw edge applique is great. I use that for my watercolor to quilts, and it's a great way to play. And again, like the things you can do when you just have to cut the fabric and use that, like it opens up a whole world of
Yeah.
possibility. English paper piecing is great because you can play with repeat motifs. I love that, the fussy
Hmm.
cutting and radial symmetry and all of that. Improv is great because you can let go and come up with some really aesthetically flowy works.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And then there's always foundation paper piecing, of course, is always a favorite, and traditional piecing has its place. I probably do the least of that.
Mm.
I do the least measure squares, rectangles, sew them together, and have a block at the end. Most of what
Yeah.
I do is something else.
Mm. Yeah, that's so cool. Well, you mentioned your watercolor to quilt, and you've just released it as an on-demand class. So, did you teach it at QuiltCon this year or
I
in
did. Yeah.
2024? Okay.
Yeah.
So, that's okay. I think that's when I became aware of your work. And anyway, so let's talk about that because that's really cool. I was looking into like all your posts about it and just what that is, but I want you to tell everybody about it.
I would love to. Watercolor to quilt came from a challenge I did probably 2 years ago. I think I started it. And I did a 100 days project. The 100 days project, you're probably familiar with them, where you pick a certain thing and do it for 100 days. And I had done quilting related ones, and I wanted to try something that would spark my creativity, but was not directly quilting. So I did 100 days of watercolor exploration, I think I called it.
Mhm.
And I had a 5x7 notebook, like yay big, and I would just do watercolor painting every day. And in that progression, I eventually got to, like, I tried different styles, and I got to one where most, like, my watercolor idea was to make shapes with colors and have skinny white lines in between the shapes. So whatever I was building had that white line in between. And
Mm.
the more I played with that technique, the more I was thinking this would make such a cool quilt. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make one into a quilt and see how it works. And that's how this kind of started, as kind of a springboard way to play with color and design and texture in a fairly low stakes way. Because
Mhm.
when you are starting with watercolor, I can sit and make 10 watercolors in, I don't know, however long like it doesn't matter how long. It's faster than making 10 quilts, like, but
Yeah.
four different shapes and different colors and different flows, and then pick one to turn into a quilt. And it just lets you play with different things in a really accessible way.
Mhm.
And it's been really fun to then teach others how to do that, because I think I excel in the order of operations. I have a background in science, and so the
Okay.
whole how to get from point A to point D and all the points in between comes very clearly to me. And so being able to clearly take people step by step
Mhm.
so that it's not challenging, it's very straightforward. But then to be able to make a really awesome quilt from
Mhm.
watercolor is neat. So
Yeah.
it's been really fun. It's been well received, and the people at QuiltCon had a great time. I love that there are a lot of folks are like, well, I can't paint. And that's like, they're just, I can't paint. And I'm like, trust me, trust me. You do not have to be a painter. You do not have to consider yourself an artist to play with shapes on paper. And
Mhm.
I think part of what I love so much about it is the whole premise is to let go and play and have fun. And they are not labor intensive enough, if that makes sense. Like, they're
Mhm.
fairly straightforward and don't take a lot of time in the grand scheme of making a quilt, that you
Yeah.
can you can play with things without a lot of high stakes. You're not going to waste a lot of fabric. You're not going to waste a lot of time, and you can still see how it translates and make a lot of adjustments from point A to point B too. So
Yeah.
it's very fun and super versatile.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's so cool. And yeah, like what a fun way to translate or like to incorporate two different, seemingly different
Hmm.
crafts and hobbies and arts into each other and bringing them together. And you're right. I mean, quilting overall is just shapes sewn together, and however you get there, which if it's traditional piecing, great. If it's paper piecing, great. If it's
Yep.
applique, great. Like it at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of shapes coming together to make something larger. And excuse me. So being able to kind of move from watercolor to fabric is that's really fun, and what a fun idea, and, like, yeah, it's hard to look in the go out in the world and look at anything and not go, "Hmm, I wonder if I could make that into a quilt."
Absolutely. This gives you a vehicle for that in a big way, and that's actually been part of the most fun, and it's the most fun out of teaching in general, is to see mostly the students who do things completely different than you would, right? Because every person is different, and that's something that I also really like about the watercolor to quilt class and technique, is that it's so versatile. Like, you can make it look like something. Like, one woman made a rabbit jumping through a field. You can make it completely abstract. You can make it just shapes. You can make it a landscape. Like, there's one that was so cool. I think it was actually a watercolor, like a note card or something that she had. And she was like,
Mm,
I would love to make this into a quilt. And so she adapted it to fit the color with skinny white lines in between. And it came out so well. And that's part of the fun, is that you can look at something and be like, oh, that could be a quilt. Like,
yeah,
this is a great technique to do that. So
yeah,
yeah.
how fun, and, so how is the class presented? Is it, like, in modules, or is it just, like, one video, or
Oh yeah, it's in modules and it takes you a step at a time. So at first I talk about watercolor in general, like I talk about the materials you need, and then there's a video on how to watercolor, just basics of, you know, dip your water brush in water and then to the color and then to the paper, and different techniques to get the best effect.
Mhm,
And then I talk about like the playful nature of watercolor painting,
mhm,
and I flip through a lot of my examples just to get wheels turning, because I went through so many different renditions of whether it's a scene or abstract circles or triangles of different size and shape. Um, so there's a whole, small videos at a time, so you could do it a piece at a time about watercolor, and then it takes you through each step.
okay.
So I'm not gonna talk through all of them, all of
Yeah,
them.
it's okay.
But there are, I think the videos are from like between 3 and 12 minutes on average. And then it takes you a chunk at a time. Like, this is what you do next. And then once you get there, go on to the next video and take it to the next step. And then with, of course, tips and tricks along the way to troubleshoot different things that could come up. All the way through to finishing, because
Mhm,
they're small quilts, they lend themselves well to facing. I,
mm,
I I like facing them. You can certainly bind it the way you would bind any quilt. You could also wrap it on canvas. And so I share some resources of like very specific tutorials on how to either face your quilt or wrap it on canvas or something like
mm,
that. So it takes you through from A to B with a lot of encouragement along the way, because I know especially the watercolor component, that was something that teaching at QuiltCon helped make clear to me, that a lot of people wanted to do it and they don't trust themselves as artists.
mm,
And that's hard to see, because
mhm,
and part of what I think I'm hoping to help heal a little bit through sharing this is like, yes, you
mm,
can do a watercolor painting that you want to make it, like, that's good enough to be made into a quilt. And then to see people have success with it, and it's been great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so wild to me talking to other quilters in general, and I think it's just because it's such a women-dominated craft that, like, there's so much self-doubt, and I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
"Girlfriend, look at what you made. Are you kidding me right now? Like,
Yep.
who are you who are you
Uh-huh.
being modest for? Like, we're not humble here. We are proud of ourselves. We pat ourselves on the back. We say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I made that. Yes, I can because 'cause I'm a badass." It's like but I say that with caution because I also can tend to self-doubt and feel impostery sometimes, but
Same. I do think it's universal, and it's so much easier to tell everybody else,
yeah.
"You can totally do this." And then
Yeah.
it's, why do I suck?" And it's
Yeah.
like, but that's, yeah, I mean, that could be a whole other conversation. I think there's
Yeah,
a lot.
right?
I think it does come from being a women-dominated field, and, the patriarchal conditioning that we grow up with,
Mhm.
and the, encouragement to be modest and humble and feeble and
Mhm.
do all that.
Yeah. Well, I
But it
just
takes practice to like get to a
yeah.
point where you can be like, I can be confident in my skills and I can be confident in trying something new and I can be confident in seeking failure. Like I can start something knowing that I probably will suck at it. That's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay to do something and suck at it. And I think that's also part of it. Like
Yeah.
aside from the female self-doubt, there's also the fear of or the thought that we have to be good at the things that we do.
Mhm.
Be good at. That's it. Like who says what's good? That's
Yeah.
that's another really funny thing that's come from the whole watercolor to quilt thing, is especially with the watercolors. I would share 10 at a time on Instagram and often would ask people's favorites, and the number of times my absolute least favorite was like the favorite of a bunch of people floored me, because then it's like, all right, so something that I think is amazing, someone else might be like, meh, but then something that I make that I think is kind of crappy, someone else might be like, that is my favorite. And that's all okay, you
Yeah.
know? And so I think acknowledging that maybe will help people make things for the sake of making them. And if you don't love it, that's okay. Maybe someone else will, and you can give it to them and make their day or sell it to
Yeah.
them, you know, I don't
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and art as a whole is subjective and um it takes it takes on a new life in each person's eyes, right? So if I'm looking at something and you're looking at something, I'm going to see and feel something different than what you see and feel from it. And you never know what that's going to be. You never know who it's going to resonate with or what it's going to bring up for a person. So somebody liking the thing that you like the least about your work is just proves that, right? It just proves that like there's something for everybody out there. There's meaning in everything, if depending on the person looking at it. And I think that's where I get a little hung up on like judging quilts and quilt show kind of thing. And like as much as I love QuiltCon and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna participate, I still just like get like a and I mean that's not the only quilt show ever, but you know what I'm saying. The just I kind of get that like icky feeling of like, but everybody's art is special and it means something and it's worthy. And so I think that like, you know, rejection
mhm.
piece can kind of get in the way. But again, like I've seen some really great attitudes, especially right around this time, because this is when people are getting their letters back from QuiltCon for 2025. But just that like you didn't fail just because this one institution didn't bring it into their, you know, their show. Like you still made this really amazing thing. You still put yourself through the process. You still tried something new, or you still, you know, like almost failing up kind of thing. Like it's not a failure, but it was just a no. And I think sometimes no's is just like gosh, sorry, I'm like so choppy right now.
No, it's good. It's nice.
Sometimes sometimes hearing a no is like, oh, that's a door closed, but then it opens a door somewhere else and you never know what that's going to be. And so anyway, all that to
No,
say, I agree with you. I think just like not being afraid to just try stuff because you never know. And even if you don't like it, that's okay. You still put the practice in and you still put the work into trying something. And that has merit, that has value. And doesn't matter if it's good or nice or, you know, it's like, but you did it, you know, you could have the
yeah,
wonkiest seams ever, or you could have your machine could have eaten the fabric, but you still tried something. You know, it's like there's a million things that can go wrong that's outside of you, but the fact that you put yourself in a position to try something new and face like maybe a baby tiny fear of messing it up. And I think
yeah.
I like the concept of putting it on paper first with the watercolor, because I think like you said, especially when it's small, there's such a fear of cutting into your fabric and like
Yep.
waste, quote unquote, wasting fabric.
Uh-huh.
But if it's a small endeavor, or if you put it on paper first to make sure you like it,
Mhm.
that probably alleviates some of that stress of like, oh my gosh, I have to cut into this fabric. Like, what if I don't do it right? Or what if I don't like it? And
Mhm. It certainly helps with that. And I think you're right in the being like it's kind of being comfortable being uncomfortable, like getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when you know, keep going, even though you think you're doing something wrong or doing
hmm
something not well, you're learning, right?
hmm
And so that's something, I think about that a lot in terms of my kids is teaching them that the only way you learn is by making mistakes. Because if you get everything right every time, you're not learning new things. You learn by making a quilt and getting feedback from it. And also, I think the judging for a quilt show is a totally different animal.
yeah.
I also really appreciate the QuiltCon Rejects party because I
hmm
think there's a lot. I mean, I'm a very proud QuiltCon reject. I
Yeah.
mean, like, I feel like, and that's okay because it is subjective, and they all
hmm
acknowledge that. There are judges, and they are judging it based on based on criteria, yes, but each
Sure.
person, as you said, sees different things in each quilt, in each
hmm
work.
hmm
And that is just part of what a judged or curated, like anything that's curated, it's curated by the person, by the curator,
Yeah.
right? Just because you didn't get in this year doesn't mean you're not good. It doesn't mean that
hmm
you're not great. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be accepted next year.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, the way things fall. So,
Yeah.
but I think it's hard because I totally hear you with like everybody's art has merit and value, and I believe that deeply. And they get how many submissions? How are they going to have a quilt show with 2,500 quilts in it? It's just
Yeah.
logistically impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
Something has to happen. And I think that it's an experience that, yeah, it's hard to get rejected.
hmm
And it's hard to put your heart and soul into something and have someone say, we're not choosing you. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of growth that can happen and like acceptance that
hmm
we do not control.
Yeah, again, that
Not in
control
our
piece.
control. And we can choose to take that rejection and be like, I'm not good enough. Or we could
hmm
take it as, all right, I didn't make it this time for that show. I still love my quilt, so there.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot more of that lately, and I like that. Not
Yeah.
like still proud of this. Like, yes, I'm sad. It would be great to see it hanging in a show. That would be fun.
Yeah.
And it's okay if it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the cognitive dissonance of having like multiple feelings or thoughts about a thing is okay. And I think sometimes we can fall into the human trap of thinking we can only feel or think one thing at a time and the
Mm.
complexity of that. But yeah, like being sad and being bummed, but also holding space for being like, but I'm still so proud of what I did. And I still you can still appreciate the process that you went through and the things that you've learned. And but yeah, it takes a definite more open mindset to be able to accept those things and accept those kind of little rejections, because it's not gonna, at the end of the day, is it really going to impact your daily life? Is it gonna crush your family and take away
Hopefully
your basic
not.
needs? It's like
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully not. But I think sometimes we can get um we can get so focused on like wanting a certain result that when it doesn't happen, it's like, what do I do now? We didn't make a contingency plan, or we didn't have it in our minds that that thing wouldn't happen. So there wasn't a ready response for the no, for that door being closed. So anyway,
That,
it's just,
that totally makes sense. That's why have you heard people say, well, if you just expect disappointment, you'll never be disappointed.
yeah.
Not trying to do that. I don't think that's
No,
the way to go. I feel like I have the opposite mindset. I'm more of like the perpetually hopeful person. Like,
yeah.
well, maybe next year, or now I get to snuggle it with it on my bed, or but that can come back to bite you too. So
Yeah.
you do what you can.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't be like endlessly pessimistic, but if you're also way too optimistic, you're always going to be disappointed. It's like, where's the happy medium?
There is, and we'll probably be sticking it forever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all right. So besides the watercolor class, do you have any other classes like on demand for?
I do. I have, well, I have my quilt photography basics class, which is very popular actually. And it's, I taught quilt photography at QuiltCon for a number of years. I've since stopped because there's a lot of equipment that needs to be lugged.
Mm,
But so the on-demand class is a really easy, accessible way, and I teach it as a lecture to guilds and that kind of thing too.
okay.
But so I have quilt photography basics on demand. I also have a So Tiny Ornament on-demand class that I had a sew along a couple years ago and made all of the content for that and decided that it lends itself well to just be a self-run, self-led class. It
Okay.
uses my So Tiny sampler and So Tiny adventure patterns, which are included in the on-demand class, but they are quilt blocks that finish at 1¼ inch. They're foundation paper pieced. I've dabbled in all of the impossible. So whatever, if there's something that's supposed to be hard, I've done it
Yeah.
or tried it. Um,
Yeah.
but so I have the two patterns that have, I think, 14 to 15 blocks each, and they are all tiny. And so this class gives you both the foundation paper piece patterns and instructions or instructions. I always mix those up. Instructions on how to make it into a little ornament. And or it could be a pincushion, or I have them hanging on like the window hangers, just a
Mm-hmm.
decor. So that's another on-demand class. I also have a membership group called the Quilt Your Life Crew.
Okay.
That is it's a sliding scale. Enrollment is always open, and there's a sliding scale for membership because when I first started it, I followed all of the marketing things of have small windows of enrollment and this price and I learned a lot more about anti-racism and oppression and a lot of the a lot of the marketing strategies really play into that a lot, and I wanted to not be a part of that. So I decided that enrollment is open all the time. There's a sliding
Mhm.
scale, so as low as $7 a month as to as much as you can offer to help support making it accessible to all. But it began back when I first started teaching Quilt Your Life, which is the idea of tying quilt making together with life. And it can be either data-driven quilts. So like the one behind me is my summer loving quilt from the summer of 2022. And each block represents either a period of time doing an activity or the completion of an activity that brings me joy or pleasure. And so I tracked that. And at the end of the month, I added up how many of each block I got and made quilt blocks for it. So I
Okay.
started this crew because I started teaching that as online workshops. So I had I think it was a 3-hour workshop and people registered and we did it. And at the end, a couple of folks, I kept hearing this is amazing. All right, I've got my plan. I'm ready to go. I wish there was some kind of group where we could have accountability buddies throughout the year because sometimes
Yeah.
they can be any stretch of time.
Hmm.
But I've done projects that are a year long, and so a lot of people will make a year-long project or a 3-month project or something like that. And so that got my wheels turning, and this was back right during COVID, or right at the beginning before COVID started, I think. Um,
Hmm.
and things were moving more to online, and I'm like, I can make that. And so it started as a way to support people who are making quilts that tie into life, like Quilt Your Life quilts. And it has grown into so much more than that. There are a number of members who have not made a Quilt Your Life quilt and probably won't, and that's okay because that's not what it's about. It's about supporting each other, just being present. And it's a really wonderful group of people who are intentional about the way they live. And I
Hmm.
think that's a big piece of the Quilt Your Life component is determining something that really fills you as a person and coming up with a creative way to help yourself do more of it. And
Yeah.
my membership group is a really fun group. We have very casual weekly meetings on Zoom on Wednesdays, and then we have more formal monthly member meetings on Zoom also, where we share projects or sometimes I share techniques or do show and tell to talk about project ideas or progress or that kind of thing. And the website, like when you join the crew, you have access to a website that's a whole library of technique tutorials, both video and text. But there's foundation paper piecing basics, how to design your own foundation paper piecing patterns, because that way,
Mhm.
if you want, like a lot of my patterns, I needed a runner for a running quilt, so I designed a runner. And so teaching people how to make the block, the representative block they want.
Mhm.
Improv, like inset circles, improv curves, improv mountain piecing. There's hand stitching, English paper piecing basics, embroidery, some embroidery stitches, as well as planning documents and inspiration posts. And so there's a whole library of resources also available to the crew.
Oh, wow.
So that's what I've got so far. I have a foundation paper piecing on-demand class, hopefully coming in the spring to go
Ooh,
along with my economy bloom pattern. So
okay.
we'll see how that comes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully that works out because that's I think I think yeah, we get to a point where we've done, done the traditional piecing method so much and I think our brains naturally seek more like what more can I do? How else can I add to this? And I think foundation paper piecing is a great next step. I mean, I've recently done a lot of it for client
Yeah.
quilts and for myself, but just before it was one of those things where I was like, this is so hard. I can't do it. But having voices around me that are like, no, you can do it. It's fine. Like, just you're going to mess up a little bit at first, but once you get the hang of the kind of flipping back and forth and like thinking backwards kind of thing is you're
Yeah.
going to be fine. And so all the way back to Grammy June, like not
Yeah.
telling you like, yeah, it's hard, but you can do it, I guess. Like she let you believe that you could do it without,
No problem.
yeah, you could say, is this hard? And instead of saying yes, her just saying, no, you can do it. You're
Yeah.
like there's something to be said for that kind of external voice of confidence for you that when
Yeah.
you're self-doubting or thinking like, I can't do that, like
Mm.
that is so helpful and that's beautiful that you have a whole community of people that can do that for each other
Yes.
and it matters, especially when you don't have people around you physically that can do that for you. Because some
Yeah.
people just don't. I met so many quilters who they're the only person they know as far as like, their physical in-person friends, or they don't
Mhm.
have anybody where they live that also quilts that they know. And so the online community is where they find their people and it's so important to that and that voice of support of like, you can do this. It's not that hard.
Yeah. And there's so much of that. And also on the flip side, encouragement that it's okay. Like if you try something and fail, you're enough. You did
Yeah.
great. Like you can have days where or months or weeks where you can't sew for whatever reason. And so there's a lot of support in being gentle with yourself wherever
Mhm.
you are, because that's another thing that I think happens frequently with quilters is, you get in your mind like, well, I tried this and I sucked at it, so I can't do that. And then
Mhm.
instead of being like, number one, maybe if you tried in a different way, that would help. But also, number two, it's okay to say that's not a technique for me. That is
Yeah.
totally fine to be like, I love this aspect of quilting and I don't love this aspect. So it's okay to just do that aspect. So that's also really helpful to keep in mind too, is that,
Yeah.
where you are is enough and good enough. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can try it. Just try it.
Yeah.
Of course you can.
Yeah.
That's with foundation paper piecing especially, that's definitely a technique that like different people's brains work in different ways. And I
Mhm.
know I've taken foundation paper piecing classes from a number of different big foundation paper piecing teachers, and every
Mhm.
single person does it differently. Every single person and differently than the way I do it. And I've had this conversation with the crew and with other quilters how sometimes there's a technique and you learn it from someone and you're like, I have no idea how to do that. That makes no sense to me. And then you learn it from someone else and it's like, oh, that clicks. That
Yeah.
my brain works that way. And so
Yeah.
I've run into a handful of people or more who have tried foundation paper piecing, have not had success, did it my way. It's not my way. It's like, the
Yeah.
way that my brain functions, the way that I teach it, and they're like, okay, this now makes sense to me. Now I understand. And it is, it's reprogramming your brain because you are piecing something backwards through a mirror
Mhm.
or less. And
Yeah.
once you get the tricks and the tips of aligning things and, aligning the fabric when there's a wonky angle, that's a big one that if you sew it on and flip it and it doesn't cover your space, it's so frustrating. And
Mhm.
so to know things that you can do to prevent that, like you can test, yeah, it takes longer. You have to take the steps to check.
Right.
Once you get the hang of that and you eliminate frustration or minimize frustration, it
Mhm.
becomes that's a more pleasant technique to use.
Yeah.
So yeah, foundation papers piecing is definitely one of those techniques that I feel like you can't have too many people teaching you how to do it because everybody
Yeah.
learns in a different way. And
Yeah.
this might be your way. This might be the way that clicks for you.
Yeah. It's so funny because like my introduction to it, um, do you know Holly Clark? Holly Clark Design. She's at Hold My Seam Ripper on Instagram. Anyway, she
Yeah.
has like this little, you can make a clock face and it's foundation paper piece in two different sizes. And my mom and I had this like little janky Walmart clock in our studio. And I was like, I want to make a cute fabric clock face for that because I have all these cute scraps. And I was just like, I want to make something fun. And she was like, okay, yeah, let's try it. And she had done some foundation paper piecing for a client. They wanted this like book pattern that I can't remember whose it was, but anyway, so she's like, yeah, you can do it. You just got to do it backwards. And I don't know. It's just a circle with 12 wedges and it was so hard and I did it. I finished it and it looks cute. It's on my wall in my studio now, which is great, but um I think just that like initial dive in, I was like, this is crazy. I don't know why this is so hard. But then I tried it again on something else. I don't even know what it was, but then I was, yeah, that working through. I've never like taken a class. I've never learned from anybody else beyond
Mhm.
just like the few things like my mom kind of taught me through. And um, a couple people here and there were giving me tips and tricks a little bit here and there, but it was mostly trial and error of me just like, I'm just gonna figure this out. Like
Yeah, that's how
I
I learned too. Is Grammy June was like, you can do that. And I'm like,
yeah.
okay.
Like, I guess I can. Yeah. And so, but like you're saying, like there are bits about it that can be so frustrating if you're not quite sure how to approach, like getting those weird angles and making sure your fabric's going to cover when you flip it back over. And, but again, I've learned those things through trial and error. So it's like you can take classes and it probably makes it a lot easier. You know?
Sometimes, yeah. If the
Yeah.
technique is one that, fits with you the way you see things, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just funny. And now I love it. I mean, I happily take it on if people want that done for themselves, but
Yeah.
and I'll happily do it again for myself. Like it's a fun and the precision of it, like you were saying before, that the preciseness and getting these really cool images out of fabric that you wouldn't really necessarily otherwise be able to do unless you're doing like what's the word I'm looking for? Hmm, collage. There we go. Like collage style, like raw edge kind of building things on the surface quilting and but I like
Yeah.
the pieced look of the paper piecing too. So anyway, it's just that's I think that's a technique really that I just really thought I was going to hate and have really ended up loving and it's just
Hmm.
so fun to see how how it comes to life and where I'm noticing it more and more in different people's patterns and
Yeah.
it
I think
gets
it's probably my go-to also when I
yeah
need to, because you can do anything.
yeah
And you can make a curve with foundation paper piece and you can
hmm
make numbers and letters and shapes and people but you could also do very precise geometric repeats, you know.
yeah
I've gone to that, like for my Quilt Your Life quilts, for my running quilt, I did a lot of foundation paper piecing just to add details,
hmm
because you have control over it. If I'm like, all right, because it was mostly traditionally pieced. I don't know,
yeah
are you familiar with my running quilt, my 2020 miles quilt?
I think I saw something about it, but yeah, you can explain more.
It hung at QuiltCon last year, which was exciting.
Oh, okay, I did see it then. Yeah, I did.
But it was right the end of 20,
Mhm.
the end of 2019, I was on a run. And running is not something that I did often. It was something that I started doing because I live in rural Maine and have young kids, and it was an accessible form of exercise. But I was
Mhm.
on a run, feeling amazing, like definitely in the thick of runner's high. And I was like, why don't I do this more often? I should
Mhm.
run more often. I feel so good. And so then I was like, well, what if I make a quilt about it and every day I earn a strip of fabric color coordinated with the number of miles I run to help motivate myself, not to necessarily run faster or longer or anything like that, but to run more often, just to
Mhm.
get out and run for a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles more often. And so that started my whole thing. I pulled colors because I was planning to train for my first full marathon in October of that year. And
Mm.
COVID happened, so that didn't happen. But I picked colors through 26, um, got everything ready, planned it out, just color coordinated strips every day based on the number of miles I run, skinny strips for days that I didn't run as like a day placeholder,
Mhm.
white when I did cross training, gray when I did nothing, that I at
Mm.
first called do nothing days and then adjusted to call rest days.
Mhm.
Because when I first started the quilt, they were like shameful days where I couldn't do a darn thing. And then by the
Mhm.
end of that year, I recognized that rest is also important and very productive. So
Yeah.
changed my mindset there. But anyway, so throughout that quilt, it mostly was traditionally piece strips. But as the year went on, there are different things that I wanted to represent in the quilt. For example, when I went to QuiltCon, a group of running quilters ran together, and I wanted to
Mm.
represent the people I had run with on those runs at QuiltCon, because I think we went on 3 runs, the group of
Mm.
us. And it was the first day there were 3 of us, the next day there were 7 of us, the next day there were 2 of us. It varied. But I knew that my strips were 3 inches wide. And so if I foundation paper piece of template 3 inches wide, I could do flying geese for the number of people that ran with me. And so
Yeah.
it's so precise. You can make it fit whatever you need it to fit. And
Mhm.
so I used foundation paper piecing and like the design of foundation paper piecing lots of times during that for the people I ran with. I did a tree for hike day so I wouldn't lose credit for those miles because I didn't think I would likely run on the same day that I hiked.
Right.
Um, I did a virtual race later on after COVID called Women Run the Vote, or I think Women Run the Vote. Oh, I forget the name of it. I need to look at my quilt, but I
Okay.
foundation paper piece letters to fit the title of the race in the tops
Mm.
of my blocks. And so I love that about foundation paper piecing too. It's a technique I go to because I know whatever I need it to look like, I can make it look like I want through that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
such a cool aspect of quilting that, yeah, it just opens up a whole new world of what you can express in your quilts through fabric, and
Totally.
it's so incredible. And yeah, I did see your quilt, and I stood in front of it for a while because I was like, this is dedication.
But it was also a lifeline
Yeah.
because that was the year that it was supposed to be the first year that all 3 of my kids were in school.
Mm.
That was for the first time in a long time, 10 years or something, that I would have space that was my own without a child on my hip.
And then
And
COVID
then
hit.
COVID hit. And so instead of having like a preschooler in school for a couple hours and then the 2 big kids in school and my partner working out of the house, we were all under the same roof 24 hours a day. And I was essentially homeschooling or guiding virtual school
Mhm.
for a kindergartner, a second grader, and a fourth or fifth grader. And I had every reason not to run. I had no space or time that was my own. And because this quilt was going, I ran and it saved my life. Like,
Yeah.
no joke. It was the only time I was alone. It gave
Yeah.
me much needed physical activity, much needed emotional processing time. Like
Mhm.
it was a yes, dedication and also a lifesaver. And
Yeah.
I think that's the year where it really hit home how powerful the quilt your life idea is. And that's the year that when I was making that quilt, that's when most the most people who reached out to me about the life quilts reached out to me and was like, I love that idea. How can I make it? Like, I want to make one too. Are you okay with that? And I'm like, yes, of course. Like, this
Yeah.
has been so powerful for me. Yes, I want to share that with you. Let me tell you exactly what to do. And that's kind of how the whole Quit Your Life crew came to be. And then
Yeah.
I've just run with it, no pun intended. But since my running quilt, I've made a lot of other life tying quilts, and they all teach me something about myself. And I've grown so much through them. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I forget how we got onto the 2020 miles quilt, but that was a very epic, my first really big, I don't know, really, but my first really big Quilt Your Life quilt that was about me and that helped me as a human exist
Mm.
in the best way that I could on that
Yeah.
very challenging year.
Yeah. That's incredible. And it turned out so good. It's visually eye-catching, like, it's the impact it has is also, like, so even though it was, like, kind of like a diary of sorts for you, a way to keep track of your life for that amount of time, it started out as one thing, and now it's, like, it's this thing that gets to live in history of, like, it hung at QuiltCon, and thousands of people got to see it and experience that, and just the way it comes across, it's like, wow, it's impactful, and so the fact that it had such an impact on your life and your personal self, then getting to share that impact with other people is just incredible. So that's really neat. And yeah, the little runner, that was so cute. And yeah, I think we got into it because of foundation paper piecing, but
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
right. Because
yeah.
the little runner was foundation paper pieced. And so I had that pattern already. I have a little runner foundation paper piece pattern. And it's 3 inches, and then the pattern comes with 6 and 9. But I was like, I want to fit this in. And I also don't want to have to sew it very often.
Right.
It
Yeah.
takes a long time, like it time
Mhm,
intensive. But the little runner in my running quilt was every 50 miles. So the
mm,
run that got me to 50 miles, the next 50-mile increment had a little runner on it. And
okay.
it was a great, again, a motivation. Like
Mhm,
there were times where I looked ahead and was like, how far am I from 50 miles? How many miles do I have to run to get a purple block with a runner on it? It's like, oh, I have to run 7 miles. All right. All right, I can run 7 miles. And I'd run 7 miles when there's no chance. There's no chance I would have run 7 miles on that given day, other than to earn a little runner. So
yeah.
it's not, I call them positive feedback loops, but it's like I did more quilting and more running, which are both things that fulfill me because
Mhm,
of this project. So
yeah.
yeah,
That's awesome. And just the idea and how it can manifest in so many different ways too. I think lots of people make, temperature quilts or,
yeah,
just different things like your joy quilt behind you and there's just different things you can track and it's just about deciding what that's going to look like for you and what
yep,
your parameters are. But I think seeing someone else's work and having access to other people who are doing similar works can help because I think it could be daunting if you're not like a data person. You're not like,
totally.
how do I collect this data? I don't even know. But that's
Got all
really
the
cool.
tools. Join the crew. I've got the tracking sheets all ready to go for you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So your Quilt Your Life crew is a good spot for people who want to do that. And I love seeing people's data driven quilts. It's so fun. I don't know. Do you know Rachel Ivy Clark?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Her quilts are always just so stunning to me and
And
just
like Quit Your Life quilts don't have to be data driven too. Like there are
right.
some that are very reflective. Like the first
Hmm.
one I ever made was for my youngest child for his first year of life. And I made one little 12-inch quilt block per month
Hmm.
for 12 months. And I did a photo shoot every month with him and that quilt block. And so it was more of like, it was still documenting life and still a motivator
Yeah.
to show during a time. I had 3 kids under 5. Like it was nuts. Um, like I think back and I'm just like, oh my gosh. But like so quote your life quilts don't have to be data driven. They can be. And I love seeing what people do with that. And it also can be very reflective. It's just about the intention and the meaning that's put
Yeah.
into it.
Awesome.
But yes, yeah, that's been one of the most amazing parts of having the crew is seeing what other people do with it. Because some people, there are people who've done running quilts and quilts on the books that they've read, quilts
Mm,
on their mood, quilts on another one did a mountain quilt, but hers it was so cool. It had the key on the front was a mountain range in different colors, and it super awesome. Dabble do ya if you want to look at it. I'll have to
okay.
send you the text of that, but
Yeah.
Jenny do ya. But then like there's a woman in the crew who makes a Goodreads quilt every year, and so
Okay.
every year for the past 3 or 4 years has made a different visual depiction of books she's read based on genre, gender of author, origin. Like it can be anything.
Yeah.
Um, but it's there a lot of movement quilts. One woman made a human powered miles quilt that is not just running, but like walking, kayaking, skiing, horseshoe, snowshoeing, um, but riding a bike, dancing. Like
Wow.
anytime she felt like she was doing a human powered mile, she tracked that in a quilt for a year, and that was epic.
Wow.
Also with a lot of foundation paper piecing to put details, like to put legend type information.
Yeah.
But yeah, and even just like healing and reflection quilts, like quilts centered on being gentle with yourself and like meditation or movement or deep breathing,
Hmm.
hydration, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, they're very
That's
interesting.
really cool.
Mhm.
So cool. Well, I hope you get some new members from this because this sounds really exciting and I think a good thing for, coming into the new year and just like looking for something to do to keep you motivated and moving forward in your life. And if you're, a quilter, you always are looking for new quilts to make and this can be a great avenue for that. And how fun and exciting. I do want to talk about the little surfer foundation paper piece block you
Oh
made and
yeah,
the EPP hexagons that you put around it because it's so beautiful.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's actually my most recent Quilt Your Life quilt, and it is not data driven. So that's actually, oh my gosh, that's a funny story. Are you ready for a story?
Yeah, I am. I totally am.
Part of part of the crew meetings, we start the more formal crew meetings with introductions, just so that people are from across the world, and so people can get to know each other a little more intimately.
Mhm.
And aside from name and where you're from and that kind of thing, I usually ask some sort of question. One particular month, I asked, what is something on your bucket list? And bonus points if it's something that was on your bucket list that you let go of as you can't do it and you're revisiting the possibility.
Mm,
The reason that came up, a lot of the questions come from some self-reflection. I have always wanted to through hike the Appalachian Trail. And when I got
oh,
married and had kids, I was like, well, I missed my window. 20-year-olds do that. And now as a 43-year-old, I'm revisiting the possibility of like, that might be something that I could still do. And
mhm,
that's what spurred it all. So Sam, one of the crew members, shared that she wanted to learn how to surf somewhere where she could see through the water, somewhere where it is clear. And I, in conversation was like, oh, that sounds amazing. I've always wanted to learn how to surf. That sounds so cool. And she's like, oh, I will let you know. I will look for like weekend retreats or something like that. And I was, I thought that sounds wonderful. I'll start saving my pennies because there's no way I can afford to go. Like the cost of retreats like that are out of my budget at the moment.
yeah. Mhm.
But anyway, so that's how the conversation started. And then a couple weeks later, she tagged me on an Instagram giveaway by Pura Vida Surf or Pura Vida
Oh,
Adventures um, to win a women's surf and yoga retreat, week-long retreat in Costa Rica. And she tagged me in the giveaway, and I'm like, oh, here we go. And I was like, sure, this would be amazing, and tagged her back. And then I won the giveaway. And so it was a trip for two. So of course, Sam and I went. And so this was probably a year and a half ago at this point, but scheduling wise, the only one we could make was November, which just happened, November of this year. So it had been on the books for a long time. So we went to Costa Rica for a week to Santa Teresa. It was incredible. It was amazing. I learned to surf in 5 days. I think there were 5 days of instruction. The teachers were so good. They were so good. And the really powerful part about it is that the way they taught surfing, I guess, was so relatable to life. Like there were
mm,
so many lessons where they talked about like getting comfortable being uncomfortable and learning the most from the wipeouts. And when you relax, that's when you can really do it. If you're tense, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do. Like there were so many deeper meanings in the lessons.
Yeah.
And by the end of the week, they have little awards, and I'm kind of proud of this, but the award I got was natural born surfer. So apparently I'm a natural.
Yes.
How and where to surf in Maine. But anyway, so there's the backstory. That's why I went to Costa Rica and how I ended up going to Costa Rica with another quilter and another member of my crew, a friend. But I wanted to make a quilt to commemorate that week or to, you know, represent that week. And I was
Yeah.
playing around with ideas. I love the foundation paper piece figures. Like I have a runner and a hiker and a swimmer and a yoga one. And so I was like, well, I'll clearly have to make a
Yeah.
surfer FPP block. But I knew that I was going on a trip where there was not going to be a sewing machine. So English paper piecing was the perfect hand project. So I was like, all right, I'll make the surfer ahead of time. I'll pick the colors so that when I go on the trip, I can just hand stitch, without too much stress, without having to think about color flow while I'm on the beach in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And so I initially, like a month or so before the trip, I had all the ideas of how to make it data driven. Like the colors of the sunset can coordinate to things I'm doing to prepare for my trips. They're like push-ups or core work or swimming or, the other things that I wanted to do more of to get myself ready. But life is really chaotic right now for me. And on top of holiday preparation and everything else, it felt like a lot to track that data and get it to all come together the way I wanted it to before the trip. One of the other lessons I have as part of the crew and just in general to anyone I talk to is like set yourself up for success. It's okay to simplify things.
Mhm.
I'm not good at that. Like my crew actually has an ongoing joke that Mandy's going to start a podcast called Kitty Makes It Complicated. And people are going to show up with their projects and I'll think of all the ways it can be more complicated. Like just to give you some background there. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this simple. This is going to be a quilt that represents this trip, and
Mhm.
it's going to be you've seen it. It's a surfer with sunset colors, English paper piece, and I
Yes.
got it ready beforehand, so that got me excited about the trip. I brought it
Mhm.
with me, took pictures of it in Costa Rica, worked on it on the airplane, on the beach, here and there. So it's a really sweet and meaningful little make that just represents that incredible trip that
That's
was totally, I mean, I don't know, manifested maybe, I guess.
yeah.
That was so now that that's happened, the number of crew members that like tag me on giveaways, I'm like, game on,
You're
game
like, let's do it. It worked once. It's got to work again.
on. But
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it was an incredible trip. And Costa
Wow.
Rica, I love Costa Rica. I've been there twice before, once in
Mhm.
college for tropical biology lab because I was an
Okay.
environmental major. It's like the peak biodiversity in the world, and it's just such an incredible place. So I'm always happy to go back, but it was a much needed, well-timed trip
Yeah.
for sure.
Wow. That is incredible. And I mean, congratulations on winning that. Cause I mean, exactly like how else are you going to afford a trip like that when, things are so crazy and it's just like here, the universe is forcing you to go kind of thing. Like,
Totally. Yeah.
guess what, honey? You're going to learn how to surf.
Yes. I mean, that's really what it feels like. And it worked out because initially we were talking about going in March, and then I had a big fall, like rock climbing, bouldering fall in February, and I completely tore my ACL and meniscus. So I had reconstructive knee surgery in March. And if we had chosen any other week, I would not have been able to go. But the timing just felt it really felt like that. The universe was like, all right, babe, it's time
Yeah.
for your break. Put everything aside, chill out,
Mhm.
relax. Everything is taken care of, everything is planned because it's a fully planned retreat. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Your yoga every day, the meals are all included in there. There are extra adventures you can do in the afternoon if you want. I went zip lining and hung upside down with no hands to fly through the forest. It was for the rainforest. It was so
Oh
fun.
my gosh.
Right up my alley. But
How
yeah,
freeing.
it definitely felt like one of those, you need this right now
Yeah.
happen, and it was good.
What a gift. That's so incredible. And yeah, your little surfer is just so cute. And I like that idea that like don't overcomplicate this. Just let it be what it is. You can make a remembrance quilt to say this is from that time. I worked on it during this time, but there's nothing else behind it beyond just I enjoyed this time in my life. I got this I have this snapshot of this moment where I got to focus on myself and take care of me and check off a bucket list goal
Yes.
and experience that with someone else who also had that same kind of want
Check
and
off about
desire,
this goal that I totally co-opted.
right? But still, it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
it
Yeah,
worked out. That's so
absolutely.
cool. I
Yeah.
that's so funny that like because I always tell my husband the same thing, like he overcomplicates everything. Not everything, but I'm like, why wouldn't you just do this? And he's like, oh, I'm like,
Because that's not the way my brain brings me on a path that's just like,
yeah,
well, we could include this detail, or what if we also represent this in some way? Or
yeah.
what if I stitch? And like, yes, they're amazing and cool ideas. And
Hmm.
I'm only human, and I have projects that I really would love to finish. And time is not infinite, and
Right.
especially as a mother of three very busy children.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, simplification, that's kind of my ongoing goal, is to try to simplify and allow things to be easy.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. I
possible.
think Yeah, well, I think it's a thing too where maybe life just in general has been maybe hard and complicated and so you just kind of build that into things naturally because you're expecting things to be that way. Like that's how things are in your head. And so when
Yeah.
you simplify and learn again, like and I can only speak about this because I live with a person who battles this every day is just like the the way that his brain was hardwired as a kid was chaotic and everything was messy all the time. And so to then be an adult and like, there's different ways that we repeat those patterns unknowingly or maybe knowingly, but not really knowing how to do anything about it. And so it's something I take on to be like, but what if we just like don't and we just like
Yeah.
hang out and chill and as a person who also found value in my productivity and that's the only way I was worth anything was to be an overachiever and millennial firstborn daughter it's I'm really taking a step back when I left teaching and when you
Mhm.
know, went to working in the quilting business full time and doing the podcast. It's just like, I enjoy this and I'm allowed to enjoy what I do. And it doesn't have to be hard. It's hard in different ways. Like we were saying before we were recording, like being the sole proprietor, the only person running your business, you have to do all the things. And so sometimes you lose time for the things you love. But at the same time, like everything's figure outable. There's solutions for everything, and it doesn't have to be super complicated. And so
Right.
taking that step back to go, hold on, am I doing this because this is my brain seeking more chaos to feel more comfortable, or am I going to be a little uncomfortable and let it be simple? And so it's just an interesting journey of trying to combat that, but also still finding joy in things that are kind of fun and chaotic and have a lot of moving parts and recognizing the difference between like seeking your kind of your baseline or are you seeking like an adventure and a new thing because you want to grow. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's my
No,
2 cents.
absolutely. No, that resonates big time. I'm also the firstborn daughter.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I get that. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that in thinking about, like you said, it's not necessarily wrong to have some things be complicated and some
yeah.
things be challenged. And not everything has to be, but you have to be able to choose to simplify. And that's, ask my crew. They know me very well.
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
It is a daily battle. But this feels like a win because it is. It's fairly simple. And
Hmm.
I'm fully okay with that. And I'm fully happy with that. And
It's
that
beautiful. Yeah.
think
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I know you have a hard stop in just a few minutes because you've got to go get your kiddos, but um, I just want to ask, like, if you have a tip or just something for quilters. They could be new quilters or seasoned quilters, but just something that carries you through that, yeah, you want to share
Yeah,
with other quilters.
I think so. Based on our conversation, there are so many tips you could give, but I think the biggest tip I will share is to try, like to believe, to value the process over the outcome. Let me
Mm-hmm.
put it that way. So just because there's something that seems scary or hard or challenging, try it. It's okay to fail. It's okay to get it wrong. It's okay to do it half right. It's okay to do it but have your seams be wobbly. It's okay, like embrace where you are right now because it's all part of your story and the only way to like get better. And I hesitate to use that term better, but like in technique, like there is a smoother seam or points
Right.
match closely, which you can need or not need. But if you want to reach a certain skill level, the best way to do that is to try and to mess
Mhm.
up. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, my advice would be to go ahead and try it. Whatever that scary thing is that you think you can't do, give yourself grace and give it a try. And be
Yeah.
a, and, look for the failure. Try to make it ugly. Try to make the ugly art. We talk about that too. Make the ugly quilts. Make the quilts that you think are gross. You got
Yeah.
it out. You tried something new. You learned about colors, you learned about movement, you learned about technique. And
Mm.
that's a necessary part of the creative process too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. And, it's like Grammy June's voice in your head. Like, you can do
Uh,
that. You can do
yeah,
that.
her classic line when I would say, "What do you think about this?" She's like, "Of course you can." Or like the few times that I did something and showed her, she's like, "Of course you did." I'm like, "Okay, of
Oh,
course I did." If
I
only I
love that
could
so
trust in
much.
myself. I know. I still, I mean, she died many years ago, and I still think of those things often. Like when I
Mhm.
accomplish something or I'm like published in something, I could totally see walking into her, like she's sitting in her chair with her knitting and showing her and being like, of course she did. With a little bit of, I don't know. She's such a stoic woman. But yeah, take Grammy June to heart. And
Mhm.
yeah, of course you can.
Of course you can.
Just
I
do it.
love that.
Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do.
Yeah.
That was the other gem from her. Because the first before I knew how to sew, this is a side story and I'll end here, but
Yeah.
went to a sewing machine store, a local one, because I wanted to make Halloween costumes for my baby and my partner and I. And I think it was October 3rd that I walked into the store asking about beginner sewing lessons. And they basically were like, you want to make Halloween costumes for the three of you, and you've never sewn on a sewing machine before? No, sorry, just buy your costumes, then come sign up for our lessons later. And so I went back to Grammy June and she was like, don't you ever let anyone tell you what you can't do. And I borrowed a machine from my other grandmother and made Halloween costumes for the three of us without lessons at all. So there.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
it
I
was
love that.
definitely one of those like, don't let anyone tell you what you can't do.
Yeah.
Of course you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that so much. And thank you for sharing that because I think sometimes we forget that we can do whatever we want to do
Yeah.
and it's okay to try and fail. So I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Kitty. It's been so great to get to know you and hear about all your amazing things you've got going on. So on Instagram, you're at Night Quilter, like
Yes. Night as in
NIGHT.
the opposite of day, not night
Yeah.
and shining armor. Yeah.
Well, you
But
could be our knight in
well,
shining armor.
well.
Yeah.
thank But yes, on Instagram, I'm Night Quilter, and Facebook, same kind of thing. I have a
Okay.
blog website that is very neglected, but has an archive of great stuff back when I used to write on it. That's also nightquilter.com.
Okay.
And then
Awesome.
links to everything is in my Instagram profile. So joining the crew, on-demand classes, pattern shop, all of that.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. And I'm so excited to see more of your work and get more inspiration from you because you're doing some amazing things.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah.
Really good to talk to you.
You too.